This is 9-6, the quadratic formula and the discriminant. We're talking about, in this whole chapter, we're talking about different ways to solve quadratic equations. We talked about graphing, factoring, the square root method, completing the square, and the final method is using the quadratic formula. So this big formula that you see written here in blue, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and then that's all being divided by 2a. That formula will help us solve the solutions. Remember, we're trying to find the roots, the solutions to a quadratic equation. Also, they're called x-intercepts. So when I graph a parabola, you have, let's say the parabola looks like that. The two spots where it crosses, these are called roots or solutions or x-intercepts. And that's what we're trying to find, and this quadratic formula will actually help us find that. So let's actually solve this. So first of all, let's bring everything over to one side. So we're going to minus 7, set it equal to 0. And then notice the A is 1, the B is negative 4, and the C is negative 7. So if we just simply use this formula, so we have x equals negative b, which is going to be a positive 4, plus or minus a big square root, b squared. So again, if we take b and we square that, that's going to give us positive 16. Remember, b squared, anytime you have b squared, it's always, whenever you square something, it's always going to be positive. So make sure you make that note. And then you have minus 4 times the a times the c, all being divided by 2 times a. And a is just 1, so we're just going to have 2 on the denominator. Now, how to actually substitute this into your calculator? I would suggest that you plug it in exactly the way it looks. A lot of people, when they grab the calculator, they'll just figure the inside out, which you could do that. One way you could do this, if you do it correctly, is you could just find out the inside. If you're doing this and showing every single step, you could just do 4 plus or minus the square root, and then just literally plug 16 minus 4 parentheses 1 parentheses negative 7. So the whole inside is 44. Now, if we were looking for an exact answer, what we would do is simplify the square root of 44 to 2 square root of 11. And then to do after that, what we're going to do, if you notice, to simplify this, that is not the final answer because it can be simplified. If all 3 of these, and it has to be all 3 of them, if all 3 of those can simplify by a certain number, which they can all simplify by 2, then you actually simplify it by 2. So you divide all 3 of those by 2, and you don't need over 1. So this right here is your final exact answers. 2, and if you're entering it separately, 2 plus the square root of 11, also 2 minus the square root of 11. So those would be your 2 exact answers. Now, actually, if we're just looking for a decimal approximation, so sometimes we just want a decimal answer to 2 decimal places. So what you could do at the very beginning, like literally take this entire thing and substitute it into your calculator and make it look like that. So, I'm going to get a fraction 4 plus. There is no plus or minus button, so you have to do them separately. The square root, 16 minus 4. I'm just going to type all this in. So it looks exactly like what I have there, and then I'm going to press enter, and it's going to give you 5.32 if you round it to 2 decimal places. So 5.32. And then I'm going to second entry, I'm going to basically copy paste it, and then I'm going to go backtrack and then change that plus sign to a minus sign. And so the other decimal answer is negative 1.32. So these would be my decimal answers. Now to double check that, if I substituted this into my calculator, x squared minus 4x minus 7, and I push graph, notice it does cross at negative 1. You can actually check it on your calculator. Does it cross at negative 1.32? Does it cross at 5.32? And you can see from the graph it does. So that's a good way to double check those decimal answers. Again, if I ask for the exact answer, actually, this or this, they're the same thing as the exact answer. If I ask you for the decimal answers, that would be the answers for that using the quadratic formula. All right, so let's try two more just real quick. So to solve this, you can bring the x squared over, that's fine, or bring the 21 and the 4x over to the other side. Either one's fine, it does not make a difference. Typically, I advise students to always try to make your a positive, just because it's a little easier to keep track of, but you don't have to. So here's the formula, negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac, all being divided by 2a. And again, the a in this case is negative 1. Again, I recommend in general to always take the a positive. All right, so if I solve this, x equals negative b, so again, 4 plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and that's being all divided by 2 times negative 1. And again, if I just wanted the decimal answer, then what we're going to do is just plug that in. We're just going to type negative 2 on the bottom. So negative 7 is one of my answers. And then again, I'm going to copy paste it and then just backtrack and change that to a negative or subtractive sign. So negative 7 and 3. By the way, if it comes out nice like that, that means it could have been factored to begin with. So in this case, the quadratic formula always works, but factoring would have been quicker on this method. And you're going to do similar on this one. We're going to minus 24 from both sides. And then notice the A is 1, the B is negative 2, and the C is negative 24. So I went ahead and plugged this in. I did the quadratic formula. I plugged it into my calculator. You can see it over to the right. And I end up with 6. And I end up with negative 4. But again, if it turns out nice like that, that means it could have been factored at the very beginning. X minus 6, x plus 4. And then you could have set this equal to 0. And you get x equals 6. And set this equal to 0. And you get x equals negative 4. And again, you can always graph it. Type it into your calculator, type this into your calculator, push graph, and you'll see that it crosses at 6, it crosses at negative 4. If you do that. And then going back to one illustration, a frog jumps at this motion. And remember us doing the vertical motion problems that we've done before. I want to know how long was the frog in the air for. And again, you can use this with a rocket or a kangaroo or a rabbit or a person. How long are they actually in the air for? Using the quadratic formula. So if you notice that the A in this case is negative 16, the B is 10, and the C is 0.75. All right, so I used the quadratic formula, and then I went to my calculator, and I got two different answers, like you normally should. So negative 0.06, negative 7, right around 2 decimal places. And then I also got 0.69. Now, but remember, in this problem, since we're talking about how much time a frog is in the air, you can't come up with negative time. So even though the calculator, the quadratic formula says we had a negative answer, you have to discard the negative because we're talking about time in this case. So these really are your t's, how much time. So the frog was in the air for 0.69 0.69 of a second. And again, most people when they jump in the air, they're not in the air that long. So a frog is really quick when they jump and before they land because they're not in the air that long. So again, that's 0.69 using the quadratic formula. So let's talk about the second part of this lesson, talking about the discriminant. So if you look at look closely at the quadratic formula, inside of the square root, the b squared minus 4ac, this is called the discriminant. Again, just the highlighted area, what's inside of there. Now, what's important about looking at the discriminant, so sometimes before you even do the whole quadratic formula, you can actually just look at the discriminant and know certain things. Well, first of all, if the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, so if you notice this part right here, if it's greater than 0, so in other words, you're going to have inside the square root, you're going to have something bigger than 0, in other words, a positive number, then you're going to end up with two real solutions. Kind of like when we graphed earlier, see, we came up with two real solutions. That's because b squared minus 4ac, the discriminant, was greater than 0. So if we look at this right here, b squared minus 4ac, if it equals 0, then it's only going to cross at one spot on the x line. And if you look at if it's less than 0, in other words, you're going to have a negative number inside the square root, and we've already talked about that. There will not be any real solutions if you have a negative number inside that square root. So again, here's some illustrations. If you had, I have the black equation, the purple equation, and the green equation. And once you just look at just the discriminant. So notice I did the ABC, and I calculated the discriminant on each of these. And notice on this one right here, you end up with 4. Just calculating the discriminant. And you end up with 4. Well, 4 is greater than 0, which means you're going to have two real solutions. And if you look at the graph, again, emphasize, look at the graph, and notice I do come up with two real solutions. On this next one, the purple one, if I look at the ABCs, I just do the discriminant, notice it equals 0, which means it only crosses the x line at one spot. Again, that's what I'm coming up with here. If it equals 0, then you're only going to come up with one spot. And then finally, the green problem, I did the discriminant right here. I came up with a negative result, which there are no real solutions. And again, if you look at the graph, notice the graph is above the x line. It does not cross the x line at all. So there are no roots, no real solutions on that problem.